What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Matthew Amos podcast. This is episode 3. Just been, again, really appreciative of all the positive feedback, of all just the sharing that I'm hearing, of that you would even find that it's important and helpful. I think is love to me that I'm saying something that is beneficial, and I'm just glad I'm blessed to be a part of any kind of revelation or just learning, and hopefully it can have an impact on your relationships. So just love the feedback and I appreciate it. Kind of got a comment about my hands. Kind of got was it Talladega Nights? Will Ferrell, what do I do with my hands? I don't know why I do that, but I it's going to be a thing. I'm going to embrace it. You just thought that was funny to mention. So the name of the show, the Matthew Amos podcast, you might be thinking like, who is this guy just naming a show just with his name? And I mentioned earlier, it's because I didn't know what the title should be or what it, what it had to be. But I knew I had to start recording. I had content to share. However, I do still plan on changing the title. I feel like it's happening, getting ideas, and I know it's going to be around something, most likely around some visuals from a book in the Bible, Psalm 1, chapter 1, about being a tree rooted near streams of living water. I really just always been fascinated. I know it's very common visual, and there's something there because I started connecting to that because I've also had a near-death incident where I was going down a river, a stream, and I wasn't being cautious. I was in the Kern River, which unfortunately, sadly, has taken many lives every year. And I didn't respect the water. I didn't respect the rapids I was going through. And as I went down, I flipped over, hit my head on a rock. Thank God I didn't lose consciousness. And I made it out. And I'm just starting to see a connection between sharing and hopefully, lending caution and wisdom to other people that they might be able to receive it and, be more cautious than I have. And I plan on creating somewhat of a teaser, an intro to this podcast and the mission, because I'm starting to even find my mission even more so through this process of finding my title. So it's going to be something like that. I haven't quite nailed it down, but I'm getting closer. So it won't always be called the Matthew Amos podcast. You may have to find it with another name soon. I'm hoping to find that very soon. I'm still open to guests. I've been hearing people mentioning that they're interested, but I know it may be difficult to find it in your calendar, in your schedule, or maybe intimidating. I'm willing to talk about, again, anything that is on your mind that you're just navigating, or that you feel like you have some wisdom to share that you've learned from. You and your wife, have learned from, or your significant other. And we'd love to have it on this podcast so it can be some wisdom, a blessing to other people that they know that, wow, okay, I see that I'm experiencing that. Oh, and that's how they figured it out. Maybe I can get something from that. And it's never exact. I know everything I share is not going to be taken exactly, but you see similarities and you see some ways that you can implement some of the ideas that I'll be sharing here. So that's all I have for introduction, taking care of some details on the podcast, but I want to get into the topic for today. And I tried to make the title as not so clickbait as possible, but I'm just so tempted, and hopefully it wasn't clickbait. But talking about winning every argument, right, in a relationship. And that sounds awesome. I want to win every relationship. I don't want to be a loser. It's frustrating. It causes a lot of stress when we're arguing and having difficult conversations with our significant others, or just people that we have very close relationships with and that are important to us. And this kind of was birthed from that idea and me learning some things and hearing especially Gary Chapman, the author of the 5 Love Languages, how he says, if there's a winner in an argument, that means there has to be a loser, right? And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be married to a loser. And that really just was eye-opening to me. Okay, I don't want to win every relationship because I don't want them to feel like they lost or they're less than. I don't want to be married to a loser. I don't think any of us want to be. And also we don't want to lose. And oftentimes we can find ourselves in discussions and arguments, it's just coming in with a lot of logic and saying, and a lot of facts. And I found myself maybe coming out of a discussion with somebody and I didn't have all the facts. Maybe I didn't know enough and kind of prepared myself to say, okay, I'm going to learn more. Okay, I got this logically. This makes sense. This is sound now. I know how to come back to that conversation and I'm going to prove them wrong, or I'm going to, sound smarter, and they're going to, hear it from me. And from my experience and learning in the last few years, this is very recent for me, that when we do that, we're not coming to discussions and arguments using our entire brain, if that makes sense. We're only using primarily, and I'll preface, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor, no scientist here. This is just from reading, being curious, some self-learning, going through therapy, that when that happens and we're only using, the logical part of our brain, or maybe not only, but primarily the logical part of our brain, our brain is disintegrated. It's not integrated with all the parts that it's meant to be using. And primarily, we are disconnecting from using our prefrontal cortex. And I don't want to get too sciencey so quickly. But again, when we are only using logic and we're only trying to prove our point to the other person, we are not using things like our right side of our brain, which is very emotional, very visual, be a little bit more abstract, and we're not connecting with the emotions that are being portrayed to us, and we're not empathizing with them, because empathizing comes from the prefrontal cortex, which if we're only using, just logic, we're kind of making a decision, even though it feels subconscious, to disconnect from that. And we're just trying to prove this person wrong. We're not trying to see their emotions in it. We're not trying to validate it. And to learning from that and doing that a lot myself. And I just recently, and still working on not doing that and not trying to be right, and really spending time to be empathetic, hear the emotions that my wife is displaying to me. And I know she tries to do her best to use things like I feel, right? So you're not saying, you're always going out and when you do this, you make me feel lonely, or when you do this, I feel, little, or when you do this, I feel unappreciated. That's just a lot of blaming. And when we feel blamed, it's really difficult to use our whole brain and be empathetic, because we're just trying to protect ourselves. So usually I feel words, and when she doesn't, neither of us always do it, but being more aware of it, that to try to listen for emotions, right? Even when it's not being used with I feel, and that could sound like I feel lonely. Sometimes leaving it there, just say I feel lonely, even though if it is I feel lonely because you've been going to play basketball a lot. That's happened in my life, where I was kind of subconsciously, I just love playing basketball. Maybe things weren't so great at home, and I was just after work playing basketball, or in the morning playing basketball, instead of coming home. And, she'd say, I feel lonely. And when you play basketball, it's still a little bit of blame there, but at least I know, okay, when I feel lonely. And if, in a good day, I can take that and hear her loneliness, right? And be empathetic and say, okay, I hear that you're feeling lonely, and I have been playing too much basketball. And I can then, if I can kind of take those feelings, address them. She feels heard. It allows her brain to kind of relax. And when our brain is relaxed, we can use more of it and be more loving, empathetic, right? Make better decisions. And then I can share now how I'm feeling. And, well, basketball really helps me to relax and come home and be my best self, right? And the idea of winning every argument is that when we do this, we can both win. I know it's kind of a gimmick, but we can take the issue and we can put it in between us instead of you're the issue or I'm the issue or trying to push the issue onto each other. We can share our emotions, feel like the other person's connecting with us, and then talk about the issue kind of in the center, right? So, okay, my wife is lonely. My wife feels lonely. She needs more time, spent with me to feel loved. And I need some outlet of basketball or doing something physical. And when we both feel like, okay, we're both being heard, then we can come into these conversations with higher thinking and not disintegrated brain. We come with a wholly integrated brain and use all the power that we have, that God has given us in this brain, to be fully empathetic and loving and make great decisions. So when we come to the middle like that, we can come to solutions like, okay, well, maybe I'll play less basketball and those other days we'll go out on a date. Or what if you come to one of my games and afterwards we can go to dinner together, right? And you could and this is when you start to get creative and flexibility can happen and being adaptable. And hope really comes from when you're using your whole brain. I do understand though that oftentimes it's difficult to get to this state. And sometimes if we can't get there and we noticed, or maybe our partner's not getting there, some things that can do that have been proven to help relax and to relax the flooding that's happening. It feels like flooding in our brain. It's just a lot of emotion and anger. Maybe sometimes it's just changing in the location, maybe going for a walk and continuing the conversation, or just disconnecting yourself and taking a break. And, or it could even be as simple as, if you're sitting down and you feel this way, then stand up, right? Just changing your physical location or can help with, becoming more aware of it happening. And I think even in learning this, that is happening. Okay, I'm being super logical. I'm trying to prove my significant other wrong. Am I, you can think, am I only being logical? Am I not being empathetic? Am I not paying attention to my emotions? Am I not paying attention to my wife's emotions? Or whatever conversation you may be in. Just even being aware of that can help you to then, okay, let me try to see what's going on in my head. Because when we don't, we're just working off of habit, right? And working off of what we've learned to deal with emotions, working in the way that we've learned up until, however old you are, how to deal with situations and arguments like this. And I don't know about you, but for me, and for most of us, it takes some practice. It takes some wisdom and some relearning to really approach sensitive topics or arguments with our significant others in a way that is wholeheartedly empathetic and loving and wanting to work together so that we can both win, right? We don't want to have a loser. We want to create situations where we can both be heard. We can push that disagreement, push that issue into the center of us and look at it and say, oh, okay, how can we both win here? How can we both, right? Some may say, and you always hear compromise, but it's not even only compromising. It's how can we both win? And how can we both get what we want and what we need? Oftentimes it is hard to kind of relax yourself to be able to do that. Also, I'm going to go back to the love languages. When your love tank is low and empty from your significant other, forget it. You might as well just talk about love languages and try to pay more attention to each other and fill each other's tank with love. Whether it's spending more quality time, or, that should be the focus to then other things, because I think when your love tank is empty, that's all, at least for me, that's all I'm thinking about is how I just don't feel loved. I don't feel loved. So addressing that can definitely help. One example that I have maybe for some of the men or any basketball players, I know women play basketball players as well, whoever's listening to this, um, is similar to in basketball when we only rely on one skill. Like I know growing up, I didn't grow up playing a lot of basketball, but I got really into it in high school. And I didn't have a rim. I didn't have a court. All I could do was dribble in my garage, and I dribbled. I mean, I was watching and one mixtape stuff. I was trying all the dribbles. I wanted to throw, a ball around someone's head and embarrass them. I just, it was disrespectful. And I was just dribbling and dribbling and dribbling. And I got really good at dribbling, but I wasn't very good at shooting. I wasn't very good at playing defense. And to be a really good basketball player, you have to be good at those other things, at passing, at, reading when people might be open. There's so many other parts to it. And it's similar to that. If we're only dribbling, it's hard to win games, right? So if we're only using one part of our brain, it's hard to win in these battles that, life is presenting us, and these tests, that sometimes come from God, that it's hard to win if we're not using all of our brain. Very, very much like you're probably going to miss a 3-pointer more often than not. If you only know how to dribble, you're going to let your players score on you all the time. And an example of that is, from getting better at basketball. I remember during COVID, I knew that my 3-pointer, and this isn't about me talking about my basketball skills or anything. I do play a lot of basketball, but I knew my 3-pointer was not great at all. And it was really hurting my game, especially if I noticed that it was a big part of basketball today. And so during COVID, now that I'm an adult, I had a basketball rim in the back, and I just practiced shooting further, threes. And I had a lot of time on my hands because, it was COVID, working from home a lot. And as things were loosened, at least we were playing outside somewhat, a little further into the lockdown. And sure enough, it started to round out my game. I could dribble. Now I could shoot, starting to, be more conscious of defense. You may say, other people who know me when I play basketball say, maybe I don't play good defense. I think I play pretty good defense. I think I'm a pretty good 3-point shooter. And just that, staying on that metaphor though, that it really rounds out your game. People want to play with you more, right? And I think if you are using more of your brain, being more empathetic, people are going to want to talk to you more. People are going to want to connect with you more, right? They're going to see you as somebody who can be just, if I'm going back to the first, a stream of living water, right? That you will feed into them, and that they can find hope through your words and your listening. I'd say even less from your words, just from your listening and from being empathetic with how they're feeling. And that is only going to be more practice, so that when you come back to, probably the number one priority, if you are married or have a significant other and you're living with them, I hope you get married and all that, that you really can use your entire brain. And when you're not, I would also recommend that, okay, just become aware. Awareness is huge. Awareness that these things are happening in your brain. Awareness that, every time, right? I am aware, but every time if that issue comes up, I get so frustrated. And I would say, like, number one, if you have the capacity and you have the ability, maybe seek therapy to help explore that specific situation, because there may be something there that is triggering you that you kind of need some healing. And if you don't, I think it's just as powerful to just spend some mindful time thinking on that specific problem, because oftentimes our brain will reveal to us what's going on to there. And I think if you're spiritual and Christian, the Holy Spirit will reveal to you what's that issue and revisit it, so that then you can maybe talk about it and find some healing in that, because it's totally a part of it, right? There's a lot here. I don't want to oversimplify this topic, but I also don't want to get too much into all the nitty gritty of the science. I'm just going to make sure I stay on topic here. So moving toward, an integrated approach, like I've already been talking about, some ways to kind of ground yourself, to become more aware, that I mentioned before is physical changes, right? Or even just deep breathing, right? To help calm yourself down and feel yourself, become more relaxed. It's very important. And you may have to, disengage from the conversation. I think both, people in the conversation, hopefully there's a norm or an agreement that is okay. It doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean, that I am stonewalling you. It just means I need time. And, a little trick that I have that I don't use often enough, as I am actively going, and, for all of my believers, that as I am going into a conversation or the conversation is happening, I will either say under my breath or think it in my head, or as I'm going into it, Holy Spirit, please guide this conversation. Holy Spirit, help me to relax. Holy Spirit, watch over this discussion. It's very sensitive, between me and my wife, and just constantly, Holy Spirit, please help me. And for me, whether you believe or not, I know for me, Holy Spirit it relaxes me. It helps me to feel like I am more capable of love and empathy, so that then, I can move towards those things like I was mentioning, to be empathetic to my wife so that she can then hear me. We can kind of relax our brains and then use the most powerful portion of our brain, again, the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, and we can be more empathetic. We can be more loving, make better decisions, be more creative, really use what they call the executive, right, portion of our brain, which is like the highest thing. It's what separates us, really separates us from other creatures, is that we have that we can be so complex in our thinking. And don't we want to bring the highest complexity and the best part of us into those relationships? And it trickles down into our kids. When we can do that with our significant others, then we can practice doing that with our kids, with other people that are important in our lives. One thing, if you do have to disconnect and it is just too high, I can't, none of that is working. Another thing that's happened to me that comes from a book I've mentioned in another episode about the autonomy of the soul is being known exercise. It takes some time, if you can find a quiet place, to let yourself relax, breathe deeply and feel and imagine that you're somewhere that really brings you peace. You may have been there or you may have not, but just whether it's the beach or the forest, or for me, I know I go back to Mammoth Lakes, and in the hot springs. And I share, I'm sharing that's kind of my place, and really try to like see it, feel it, and get, some sensory going on, and imagine, if you can, and that God is there with you, however, and you may have a physical appearance of what he looks like, or not, but you could just feel his presence, and he's telling you, son or daughter, I find so much joy in you. I love you. And I am so glad that you are on this earth. And just God just loving on you and feeling and imagining his presence. It's an exercise that I try to do that, a couple of times a week, that helps to center me, and it works. I am also aware that for some people, they might not be there, and it might not work. And just be aware of that. If it's not working, okay, why isn't this working? What is my relationship with God that I cannot get there? And it's difficult to see God as a loving God, and all I can see is the judgment and, just negative feelings. And just another exercise that may work for you. And if it doesn't, just another thing to be aware of. Don't judge yourself. Don't shame yourself. Just be encouraged that, okay, I'm doing the work to get closer to experiencing, all of the joy and love and peace that God has for me. And I'm just 1 inch closer. And I would say, keep exploring maybe why that didn't happen for you. I want to talk a little bit about the prefrontal cortex. It's probably about as sciencey as I'm going to get today. Is that before I say that, again, when we are approaching arguments with only logic, just try to pay attention for that. When I'm only trying to prove somebody wrong, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's for a reason. Because honestly, what happened this Friday, Tuesday, there was an election. somebody, one, there's a lot of people that aren't in agreement, and there's a lot of other people who are happy, right? And I think it's a perfect example of how we want to come to these sometimes discussions with these people, or we're simulating discussions with these people, and we're not integrated. And by all means, I know it takes time. You should grieve if you're unhappy, or you should, if you're rejoicing, and you're happy, that's great as well. And just know that, after those emotions, when we come and talk to people, we need more empathy. We need more love for the person that maybe did vote for, their candidate won, and they're elated. And then, trying to work towards having, working towards understanding and hearing them and their emotions, their reasons. And then vice versa, maybe the person that's unhappy, hearing them, holding space for them to share their strong emotions, right? And for them to feel validated, so that we can work to understanding and may not agree with each other, but at least we can hear each other's, points of view, feelings. Because oftentimes, there's not going to be one right way, but we can at least see each other and hear each other and be more connected. The same way I'm just saying here, I want, you to have a more connected brain, to have more experiences of love and empathy, that I think God also wants us to be more connected as just a community, a society. The same way he's connected with himself. He's not just God the Father, he's the Son and the Holy Spirit. I think that's purposeful, that he is 3 in 1. He's a community in himself, and we are images of this community that is supposed to be integrated together. That's why I think also our brain is also something that, there are different things, and they have their functions. I'm not saying that you always are going to be integrated. I get it. Sometimes you're almost going to get hit by a car, and you need your fight or flight part of your brain to say, hey, get the heck out of the way. You're about to die. There are purposes, right? But when we need to be empathetic and connect with each other at the highest level, at the most important level, to be sure that we are really just honoring and valuing and loving our relationships with other people in this world, we need the highest. We need to try to have the highest level of function in our brain. And again, I've mentioned tools here that you can use to get there. And there's just so many things that I would just continue to just pay attention, to, if you can, to try to feel yourself as you get either emotional or super logical, right? If I didn't mention on the other end, you could be really emotional. And that even in itself, it's disintegrated, because you're only being emotional, and somebody needs to hear you, and you need to be felt. And with this last example of, kind of the beginning of learning of even this topic, some years back with my coaching sessions, my coaching classes, when I was coaching teachers. A video that was shared was a husband and wife sitting on the couch. And all you see is, the husband listening to the wife, and the camera's only kind of on her eyes and in her face. And she's just sharing, like, oh my gosh, just my head hurts so much. You just don't understand. It's just so painful. And the husband is just trying, and he's like, yeah, I hear you. And he's trying to be empathetic, but it's just, and he points at her forehead, and the camera backs out, and you see a nail stuck like in her head. And he's about to mention it, and he's about to point it out, and he's trying to be empathetic, but really just wants to point out the nail in her head. And she's like, and if you mention the nail one more time, and he's just like, okay. It's like, no, okay, I need to connect again, be empathetic, because oftentimes we don't want the nails in our head to be pointed out. We need somebody to connect with us so that we can feel heard, so that then we can relax our head, relax our brain, right? I think oftentimes we miss the mark when we are only connecting with maybe the facts and logical and reason, and oftentimes the first step is to validate and feel each other's emotions, hear each other's emotions, so that then we can kind of relax our brains to then say, okay, you felt found. Maybe, that person will already know, they know the nail is there, but they just want somebody to hear them and hear their pain. And then they'll let you know if they need help pulling out the nail from their head. But I just thought it was hilarious. I try to put the link to that video in the description. Just the fact that the wife just was like, no, don't mention, there's like a huge nail. It's like, look, it's not the nail. I don't want you to mention the nail. But he's like, yeah, your head hurts because of the nail in your head. And I'm not trying to, hopefully there's no like stereotypes coming out there. It's just a point of how we just need to be heard. Our emotions need to be felt. And it's just how we were created. That's a vital part of our experience. And when we can allow even ourselves to feel our emotions, because oftentimes we don't do that. We get so logical because we don't want to deal with our emotions. And, one thing I wanted to mention is maybe even find an emotion chart, Google an emotion chart and learn. A lot of us don't have the language for these emotions. Oftentimes we'll come into marriage counseling sessions and it starts off with, how are you feeling today? Sometimes it's hard to find the words. Sometimes I'm just not familiar with the word and how I'm feeling. And I just need a chart to look through all the words, my wife included, and we'll just, okay, oh yeah, that one connects, right? So sometimes we do need that left side and language side to help us connect with our emotional side. So if you're not familiar and it's hard for you to describe how you're feeling, get an emotion chart. It has been super helpful for us. And then, because we're just learning these things and becoming more aware of this emotional side of us and connecting with it and with others. And it's super important to truly connect with other people. I was going to mention one other thing. I know I said I was going to wrap up. I wanted to give that last tool there. When I in my previous job, and the job I just left, one important thing I did, and maybe you can even implement this for what you do in meetings, and I thought it was so vital, and it felt awkward because nobody does it, and it's so rare. But as I did it and kind of worked through the awkwardness, people were really appreciative of it. And at every meeting I had, I would ask, "How are you feeling?" And then I'd have a fun question like, or fun, or just, a casual question of like, what are some hobbies you have? Or how do you take your coffee? Or, what's a memory, from Halloween that really stands out to you? Just something fun and light. The feeling part one, I just wanted to kind of put on the table, not to talk about it extensively and not to dwell on it, but just know that, okay, maybe this person feels sick today and they're feeling tired, or they feel overwhelmed because, testing's coming up, or they had a bad period and they just like feel frustrated. Like naming that emotion can be so powerful to then moving into work that can be more productive, more meaningful. We oftentimes forget that emotions allow us to connect as humans. And it's very important to not forget the human aspect of everything that we're doing, right? Whether it's at work or with our significant other. Oftentimes we just try to move to the next thing, right? Very logical. Okay, well then I need to get, you need to go pick up that person and you need to go pick up the kids and then dinner, and we're just scheduling, and very logical, right? Like I've been saying. And that practice of taking 10 minutes or so in the beginning of that meeting allowed people to feel connected, relax themselves. Okay, I've been heard how I'm feeling. And then we connect, with a fun question to learn a little bit more about each other so that we can feel a more meaningful relationship. And then we can get into the work with a more relaxed brain, hopefully using more of, like I've been saying, that prefrontal cortex where we can function, at the highest level. And so that's just, one tool that I used. And I noticed that it kind of was in everything that I'm saying today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up a little bit shorter today, by about 10 minutes or so. I hope that some of these tools, some of these, knowledge and sharing is helpful to you with your relationships with your significant others. If they, anything I got wrong, or I do apologize. I'm not an expert. I'm just learning here and reading a lot. and praying a lot and being mindful and to just be able to share. And hopefully this was meaningful to you. I will be, again, sharing every Friday. I appreciate if you made it to this point that I just appreciate you listening. And I hope this maybe is beneficial to you, your family. And if it is, then maybe you can share with somebody else. Until the next time, take care and have a blessed week. Peace.